It was a cold, gray morning at the small private airport just outside New York City. The air smelled of jet fuel and damp concrete, and the wind carried a biting chill that made people pull their jackets tighter around them. Charles Bennett stood, near the entrance of his hangar, staring at his sleek white private jet with frustration etched across his face. It was supposed to be ready for takeoff in less than an hour. He had an important meeting in Los Angeles, a deal worth billions, and now everything was falling apart. The jet had broken down unexpectedly and no one seemed able to fix it. Charles had already called 3 different mechanics, but none of them could arrive on such short notice. His assistant frantically scrolled through contacts on her phone, trying to find someone, anyone, who could help. But every call ended the same way. "Sorry, we're booked." Charles clenched his fists as he paced back and forth. Time was slipping away, and with each passing minute, the pressure mounted. He glanced at his watch again, then let out a heavy sigh. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. A man like him, a billionaire who owned multiple companies and traveled the world in luxury, shouldn't have to deal with something as trivial as a broken plane. Yet here he was, stuck on the ground while his dreams of sealing the biggest deal of his career drifted further out of reach. As he continued pacing, his eyes caught movement near the edge of the hangar. There, crouched by a large metal dumpster, was a figure rummaging through discarded items. At first, Charles didn't pay much attention. Homeless people often wandered around the area, searching for food or scraps they could sell. But this person seemed different somehow. They weren't just scavenging aimlessly. They appeared to be inspecting the contents carefully, almost methodically. Curious, Charles walked closer. As he approached, the figure looked up, startled. It was a man, perhaps, in his late 40s, with unkempt hair and clothes that were worn and dirty. His face was weathered, marked by years of hardship, but his eyes held a sharpness that surprised Charles. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Charles broke the silence. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone firm, but not unkind. The man hesitated before answering. "I'm sorry, sir, I wasn't causing any trouble. Just looking for something useful." Charles studied him for a moment longer. Something about the man's demeanor struck him as unusual. Despite his ragged appearance, there was a quiet confidence to him. And then Charles noticed something else. Grease, stains on the man's hands. That detail caught his interest. "You know anything about planes?" Charles asked abruptly. The man blinked, clearly taken aback by the question. After a pause, he nodded slowly. "Yeah, I do. Used to work as an aircraft mechanic once upon a time." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Once upon a time?" The man sighed and looked down at his feet. "Life got complicated. Lost my job, my family, everything. Been living on the streets ever since." For a moment, Charles considered walking away. What good could come from trusting a stranger like this? But desperation pushed him to take a chance. He gestured toward the jet behind him. "Listen," he said. "My plane broke down, and I need it fixed right now. If you can fix it, I'll give you $500. The offer hung in the air between them. The homeless man stared at Charles, disbelief written all over his face. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded. "All right, Mr. Bennett, let me take a look." Charles watched as the man climbed into the cockpit. Despite his disheveled appearance, his movements were precise and confident. He opened panels, examined wires, and tested connections with the ease of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Within minutes, he turned to Charles and said, "It's the fuel pump relay. Faulty connection. Give me 20 minutes and I'll have it sorted." Charles couldn't believe what he was hearing. Most mechanics would have spent hours diagnosing the problem, let alone fixing it. Yet this man had pinpointed the issue almost instantly. Impressed, Charles stepped back and gave him space to work. As the man tinkered with the jet, Charles found himself watching closely. There was something captivating about the way he moved, with purpose and skill. After a while, curiosity got the better of him and he decided to strike up a conversation. "So, what's your name?" Charles asked. "Daniel Harper," the man replied without looking up. And yours is Charles Bennett, right? I've seen you on TV a few times. Charles chuckled softly. Guilty as charged. So, Daniel, how does someone go from being an aircraft mechanic to, well, this? Daniel paused briefly, his expression growing somber. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs. I lost my wife to cancer, racked up medical bills, then lost my house. Couldn't keep up with child support payments, so I lost custody of my daughter too. One thing led to another, and next thing, I knew I was sleeping under bridges. His words hit Charles harder than he expected. Here was a man who had once been skilled and successful, reduced to living on the streets because of circumstances beyond his control. It was a sobering reminder of how fragile life could be. Finally, after what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, Daniel emerged from the cockpit. She's ready to go, Mr. Bennett. Charles blinked in astonishment. That's it? You're done? Daniel nodded. Yep, shouldn't give you any trouble now. Without thinking twice, Charles pulled out his wallet and handed Daniel the promised money. But instead of leaving, Daniel simply smiled faintly and said, I didn't do this for the cash. I did it because I love fixing things. Those words lingered in Charles's mind long after Daniel walked away. For the first time in years, Charles felt a pang of guilt mixed with admiration. He realized that sometimes true value isn't measured in dollars and cents. It's measured in courage, resilience, and the willingness to rise above adversity. And standing there, watching Daniel disappear into the distance, Charles knew he had witnessed something extraordinary. The next morning, Charles Bennett woke up earlier than usual. His mind was restless, replaying the events of the previous day over and over again. He couldn't stop thinking about Daniel Harper, the homeless man who had fixed his jet with such skill and precision. It wasn't just the act itself that stuck with him. It was the way Daniel carried himself, the quiet dignity he exuded despite his circumstances. Charles had met plenty of successful people in his life, but none of them had left as deep an impression on him as Daniel did. As he got ready for the day, Charles found himself wondering what had become of Daniel after their encounter. Had he gone back to scavenging through dumpsters? Was he still sleeping on the streets? The thought made Charles uneasy. Here was a man who clearly had talent and knowledge, skills that could make a real difference, not just to Charles's company, but to society as a whole. Yet because of bad luck and unfortunate events, Daniel had been pushed to the margins of life, forgotten by the world. Charles shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. He had a busy schedule ahead of him, filled with meetings, phone calls, and decisions that would impact thousands of employees across his businesses. But no matter how hard he tried to focus, Daniel's face kept appearing in his mind. Finally, unable to ignore the nagging feeling any longer, Charles picked up his phone and called his assistant. Find out where Daniel Harper is, he instructed. The mechanic from yesterday, I want to talk to him. His assistant hesitated for a moment. Sir, are you sure? We don't even know if he... I'm sure, Charles interrupted. Just do it. An hour later, his assistant returned with some news. Daniel had been spotted near the same airport hangar where they'd met. Apparently, he frequented the area, scavenging for food and scraps to sell. Charles didn't waste any time. Grabbing his coat, he headed straight to the hangar. When he arrived, he spotted Daniel almost immediately. The man was sitting on a bench near the parking lot, eating a sandwich wrapped in crinkled paper. His clothes were still dirty, and his hair was messy. But there was a calmness about him that Charles hadn't noticed before. For a brief moment, Charles felt unsure of himself. What exactly was he doing here? Was this some kind of charity mission? Or was it something more? Taking a deep breath, Charles approached Daniel. Morning, he said, his voice casual but warm. Daniel looked up, startled. When he recognized Charles, his expression shifted to one of confusion. Mr. Bennett, what are you doing here? Charles smiled faintly. I came to see you. Me? Daniel asked, raising an eyebrow. Why? Charles hesitated, searching for the right words. Because I can't stop thinking about what you did yesterday. You fixed my jet like it was nothing. And then you walked away without asking for anything, more than the money I offered. That doesn't happen every day. Daniel shrugged, looking down at his sandwich. Like I said, I didn't do it for the money. I miss working on planes. It's the only thing that makes me feel like I have a purpose anymore. Those words struck a chord in Charles. Purpose. It was something everyone craved, yet so many people struggled to find. Here was Daniel living on the streets, and he still managed to hold on to his sense of purpose. How many others could say the same? After a long pause, Charles spoke again. What if I told you I want to hire you? Not just for one job, but permanently. Daniel stared at him, his mouth slightly open. You're joking, right? I'm not, Charles replied firmly. You proved your worth to me yesterday. Starting tomorrow, report to my office downtown. We'll get you cleaned up, housed, and back on your feet. You'll have a steady paycheck, benefits, all of it. All I ask is that you bring the same dedication you showed me yesterday. For a moment, Daniel didn't respond. His eyes darted between Charles and the ground as if he was trying to process what he'd just heard. Finally, he let out a soft laugh. Sir, I appreciate the offer, really. But let's be realistic. No one hires someone like me. Not anymore. Charles stepped closer, his tone serious. You're wrong. People like you are exactly who I want to hire. Talent isn't determined by where you live or what you wear. It's about what you can do. And you, Daniel, can do incredible things. Daniel looked away, his jaw tightening. Charles could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between hope and skepticism. After a long silence, Daniel finally nodded. All right, Mr. Bennett, thank you. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's life changed in ways he never thought possible. Charles kept his promise, arranging for Daniel to stay in temporary housing while they worked on securing a permanent apartment. A team of stylists helped Daniel clean up, giving him a haircut and new clothes. For the first time in years, Daniel looked like the skilled professional he truly was. At work, Daniel quickly earned the respect of his colleagues. His expertise saved the company thousands of dollars by preventing costly repairs and improving efficiency. Employees admired his humility and dedication, and soon rumors spread about the billionaire CEO who had given a homeless man a second chance. But it wasn't just Daniel's professional life that improved. Slowly, he began to rebuild his personal life too. With Charles's support, Daniel started attending therapy sessions to work through the trauma of losing his wife and daughter. He also joined a local community center, where he volunteered his time teaching basic mechanical skills to underprivileged youth. One evening, as Daniel sat in his new apartment scrolling through old photos of his daughter Emma, there was a knock at the door. Standing outside was Charles holding a folder. Inside were documents proving that Daniel now had full custody of Emma, thanks to Charles's legal team intervening on his behalf. Tears welled up in Daniel's eyes as he hugged Charles tightly. How can I ever repay you? He whispered. Charles patted him on the back. By being the father she deserves, that's all the repayment I need. A week later, Emma arrived at the airport, reuniting with her dad for the first time in years. As Daniel held her in his arms, he vowed never to let her down again. With steady employment and a stable home, he began rebuilding their relationship. Meanwhile, Charles became a mentor to both Daniel and Emma, treating them like family. Years passed, and Daniel rose through the ranks in Charles's company, eventually becoming its chief operations officer. Inspired by Charles's generosity, Daniel started a foundation aimed at helping other homeless individuals gain employment and rebuild their lives. On the 10th anniversary of their fateful meeting, Charles stood beside Daniel at a gala celebrating the foundation's success. As they addressed the crowd, Charles raised a toast to second chances, resilience, and the power of believing in people, even when they don't believe in themselves. The audience erupted in applause, but Daniel's gaze remained fixed on Charles. In that moment, he knew he owed not just his career but his entire life to the billionaire who had seen potential where others saw despair. And so, two men from vastly different worlds forged a bond stronger than wealth or hardship, a bond built on trust, redemption, and the belief that everyone deserves a chance to rise again. Daniel Harper's first day at Charles Bennett's company felt surreal. He woke up early, dressed in the new clothes Charles had provided, and stood in front of the mirror for a long time. The man staring back at him looked almost unrecognizable. His hair was neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven, and his clothes fit perfectly. For years, Daniel had avoided mirrors because he didn't want to see the reflection of a life that had spiraled out of control. But now, as he studied himself, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. When he arrived at the office building, he couldn't help but feel nervous. The towering skyscraper loomed above him, its glass walls reflecting the morning sunlight. Inside, the lobby buzzed with activity. Employees in suits hurried past, clutching coffee cups and briefcases. Daniel hesitated for a moment, wondering if he truly belonged here. But then he remembered Charles's words. "You proved your worth to me." Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. Charles greeted him personally, shaking his hand warmly. "Welcome to the team, Daniel," he said with a smile. "Let's get you settled." He introduced Daniel to the head of operations, Lisa Carter, who would be overseeing his training. Lisa was a no-nonsense woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. She gave Daniel a quick tour of the facilities, explaining how the maintenance department worked. Despite her professional demeanor, Lisa seemed genuinely interested in helping Daniel succeed. "You're going to do great," she told him as they walked through the workshop. "We've heard a lot about you." Daniel nodded, though he still felt like an outsider. Everyone around him moved with confidence, their roles clearly defined. He wondered if he'd ever fit in. But as the days turned into weeks, Daniel began to find his rhythm. His hands remembered what they were meant to do, and soon he was fixing equipment and troubleshooting problems with ease. What surprised Daniel most was how much people respected him. At first, he assumed they were just being polite because of Charles. But as time went on, he realized it wasn't pity, it was admiration. His coworkers appreciated his knowledge and work ethic. They started asking for his advice and relying on his expertise. It was a feeling Daniel hadn't experienced in years, and it filled him with pride. One afternoon, as Daniel worked on repairing a malfunctioning turbine engine, Lisa approached him. "Hey, Daniel," she said, leaning against the workbench. "How are you adjusting?" "I'm doing okay," Daniel replied, wiping grease from his hands. "Still getting used to everything, but it's good. Feels normal, I guess." Lisa smiled. "Normal is good. You know, everyone's talking about you. Not just because of Mr. Bennett hiring you, but because of how hard you work. You're making a real impact here." Daniel looked down, embarrassed. "I'm just doing my job." "No, you're doing more than that," Lisa said firmly. "You're showing people what's possible when someone gets a second chance. That's powerful stuff." Her words stayed with Daniel long after she left. For so many years, he'd believed he was worthless, a failure. But now, surrounded by people who valued his skills and contributions, he began to see himself differently. Maybe he wasn't just a homeless man trying to survive. Maybe he was something more. As Daniel settled into his new role, Charles kept a close eye on him. He didn't interfere too much, preferring to let Daniel find his own way. But every now and then, Charles would stop by the workshop to check in. Their conversations were brief but meaningful, often focusing on Daniel's progress or future goals. One evening, after most of the employees had gone home, Charles found Daniel working late. The workshop was quiet except for the hum of machinery and the occasional clink of tools. Daniel was focused intently on a piece of equipment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Still here?" Charles asked, walking over. Daniel glanced up and smiled faintly. "Yeah, just finishing up this last repair. Didn't want to leave it for tomorrow." Charles nodded approvingly. "That's dedication, but don't burn yourself out. Balance is important." "I'll keep that in mind," Daniel said, chuckling softly. Then, after a pause, he added, "Thank you, Mr. Bennett, for everything. I don't think I've ever properly thanked you." Charles waved a hand dismissively. "Don't mention it. You're the one doing the hard work. I just gave you a push." "It was more than a push," Daniel insisted. "You saved me. And not just me, you saved my daughter too. I'll never forget that." Charles met Daniel's gaze, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. Family is everything, he said quietly. I lost mine once. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Two men shared a moment of understanding before Charles changed the subject. Speaking of family, how's Emma adjusting? She's doing well, Daniel replied, his face lighting up at the mention of his daughter. It's been tough, we have a lot of catching up to do, but she's strong. Smarter than I am, that's for sure. Charles laughed. Sounds like she takes after her dad. Daniel shook his head modestly. If only she knew half the things I've done. Well, maybe it's time to focus on the present, Charles suggested. You're building a new life for yourself and Emma. That's what matters. Emma, now 13, was slowly adjusting to her new reality. After years of living with foster families, she was wary of trusting anyone, even her father. But Daniel was patient. He spent hours talking to her, listening to her stories, and learning about the life she'd lived without him. Slowly but surely, their bond began to grow stronger. Charles played a big part in their reconciliation. He invited Emma to visit the office, introducing her to employees and showing her around. At first, Emma was shy, unsure of how to act around such a wealthy and influential man. But Charles's warmth put her at ease. He treated her like his own granddaughter, taking genuine interest in her hobbies and dreams. One Saturday afternoon, Charles took Daniel and Emma to a local park. It was a rare break from their busy schedules, and both father and daughter seemed to relax in the fresh air. As they sat on a bench watching ducks swim in the pond, Emma turned to Charles. "Why did you help us?" she asked bluntly. Charles smiled. "Because your dad deserves a second chance, and so do you." Emma looked at Daniel, then back at Charles. "Thank you," she said softly. For Daniel, hearing those words from his daughter meant more than anything else. In that moment, he realized how far they'd come, not just individually, but as a family. They weren't perfect, and there were still challenges ahead. But together, they had hope. Over time, Daniel became more than just an employee at Charles's company. He became a symbol of resilience and redemption. His story inspired others, proving that no matter how low someone falls, they can rise again with the right support. Even Charles found himself changed by their friendship. Helping Daniel reminded him of the importance of compassion and humanity, qualities he'd sometimes forgotten in his pursuit of success. And so, as months turned into years, Daniel continued to rebuild his life, one step at a time. With Charles by his side, he discovered that second chances weren't just about starting over, they were about creating something better, something meaningful. Years passed, and Daniel Harper's life transformed in ways he could never have imagined. What started as a simple job fixing planes turned into a journey of growth, not just for him, but for everyone around him. Every morning, Daniel woke up with purpose, knowing that his work mattered. He no longer worried about where his next meal would come from or whether he'd have a roof over his head. Instead, he focused on building a better future for himself, for Emma, and for others who needed help. At the company, Daniel quickly rose through the ranks. His skills and dedication earned him promotions, and within 5 years he became the head of the maintenance department. It was a role he never thought he'd hold, but one that suited him perfectly. Under his leadership, the team worked like a well-oiled machine, preventing costly breakdowns and keeping operations running smoothly. Employees respected him not just because of his expertise, but because of the way he treated them, with kindness and fairness. Daniel also made it a point to mentor younger workers, especially those who came from difficult backgrounds. He saw parts of himself in them, young men and women struggling to find their place in the world. During lunch breaks, he often sat with them, sharing stories from his own life and offering advice. "Don't let your past define you," he'd tell them. "You're more than the mistakes you've made. Keep pushing forward." His words resonated deeply with many of the employees, and soon, Daniel became known as someone you could always count on, not just for technical guidance, but for emotional support too. Even Lisa Carter, his former supervisor, admitted that Daniel had taught her valuable lessons about resilience and humility. Emma, now a teenager, blossomed under her father's care. She was smart, curious, and full of energy, traits that reminded Daniel so much of her mother. Though their relationship had been rocky at first, they grew closer with each passing day. They spent evenings cooking dinner together, talking about school, friends, and dreams for the future. On weekends, they explored the city, visiting museums, parks, and festivals. For Emma, it felt like she finally had a real family again. Charles. Bennett remained a constant presence in their lives. He wasn't just a boss to Daniel. He was a friend, a mentor, and even a surrogate grandfather to Emma. Every holiday season, Charles invited them to his mansion for dinner. At first, Daniel felt out of place among the luxury and elegance, but Charles made sure they felt welcome. He laughed at Emma's jokes, asked about her school projects, and encouraged her to pursue her passions. One Christmas, Emma surprised Charles with a handmade gift, a small painting of the park where they'd spent that memorable afternoon feeding ducks. When Charles opened it, his eyes softened. "This is beautiful, Emma," he said, genuinely touched. "Thank you." "You're welcome," Emma replied, beaming. "I wanted to give you something special." That moment solidified the bond between them. To Emma, Charles wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was someone who cared about her and her dad. And to Charles, Emma represented hope. The kind of hope that came from seeing a family heal and thrive. As Daniel's career flourished, he began thinking about how he could give back to the community. He remembered all the times he'd been helped by strangers who shared food, by social workers who offered shelter, and most importantly by Charles, who believed in him when no one else did. Inspired by these memories, Daniel approached Charles with an idea. "Mr. Bennett," he said one afternoon during a meeting, "I want to start a foundation, something to help homeless people get back on their feet." Charles leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "Tell me more." "I know what it's like to lose everything," Daniel explained. "But I also know how powerful a second chance can be. If we provide training, housing, and support, we can help people rebuild their lives, maybe even hire some of them here, at the company." Charles nodded thoughtfully. "It's a great idea. Count me in. We'll make it happen." With Charles's backing, Daniel launched the foundation, naming it Rising Again. The organization partnered with local shelters, vocational schools, and businesses to create programs aimed at empowering individuals experiencing homelessness. They offered job training, mental health counseling, and financial literacy courses. Within its first year, Rising Again helped dozens of people secure stable employment and housing. The impact was immediate and profound. Stories of transformation spread throughout the city. One man, a former construction worker who had fallen on hard times, credited Rising Again with helping him regain custody of his children. A young woman, once addicted to drugs, found sobriety and started working as a receptionist at Charles's company. These success stories inspired others to join the cause, and soon, Rising Again became a beacon of hope for countless individuals. Despite his achievements, Daniel remained humble. He knew he hadn't done it alone. Without Charles's belief in him, none of this would have been possible. Whenever reporters asked about his journey, Daniel always gave credit to the people who had supported him along the way. "It's not about me," he'd say. "It's about what we can do together. Everyone deserves a second chance, and if we work as a team, we can change lives." Charles admired Daniel's humility. Watching him grow into the person he was today filled Charles with pride. In many ways, Daniel had changed him too. Before meeting Daniel, Charles had been focused solely on business and profit. But now he understood that true success wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in the lives you touched. One evening, as Charles sat in his office reflecting on everything that had happened, Daniel walked in. "Got a minute?" Daniel asked, smiling. "Always," Charles replied, gesturing for him to sit down. Daniel hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I wanted to thank you for everything, not just for hiring me, but for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. You gave me a chance, and because of that, I've been able to help others." Charles smiled warmly. You don't need to thank me, Daniel. You did the hard work. All I did was open a door. You're the one who walked through it. And look, how far you've come. Daniel nodded, his eyes glistening with emotion. Still, I wouldn't be here without you. And neither would Emma. You've given us both a future we never thought we'd have. They sat in silence for a while, the bond between them stronger than ever. It was a bond forged not out of wealth or power, but out of trust, compassion, and mutual respect. Together they had proven that even in a world often divided by privilege and circumstance, it was possible to bridge the gap, one act of kindness at a time. As the years went on, Daniel continued to lead Rising Again, expanding its reach and impact. He traveled across the country speaking at conferences and sharing his story. His message was simple. No matter how dark things may seem, there's always hope. There's always a way forward. And through it all, Charles stood by his side, cheering him on. Their friendship became a testament to the power of second chances, a reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person to see the potential in another. Together, they showed the world that redemption wasn't just possible, it was worth fighting for. By the time Daniel Harper reached his 10th year at Charles Bennett's company, he had become more than just an employee or a friend. He was a symbol of resilience and hope. His journey from homelessness to leadership inspired countless people, both inside and outside the organization. But for Daniel, the most meaningful part of his transformation wasn't the promotions or the recognition. It was the lives he touched along the way. Rising Again, the foundation Daniel had started with Charles's support, had grown into a nationwide movement. What began as a small initiative to help homeless individuals in New York City had expanded to cities across America. The foundation partnered with businesses, schools, and government agencies to create programs that offered job training, housing assistance, and mental health support. Thousands of people had benefited from its services, and many credited Rising Again with turning their lives around. Every day, Daniel received letters and emails from people who had been helped by the foundation. Some shared stories of overcoming addiction, while others talked about reuniting with estranged families. One letter, written by a young man named Alex, stood out to Daniel. Alex had been living on the streets for years after running away from an abusive home. Through Rising Again, he received counseling and enrolled in a trade school where he learned carpentry. Now Alex owned his own business and employed other formerly homeless individuals. Reading these stories filled Daniel with a deep sense of fulfillment. He often thought back to the days when he was scavenging through dumpsters, wondering if anyone would ever care about him again. Those memories fueled his determination to keep helping others. If I can make it, he'd tell himself, so can they. Emma, now 22, had grown into a confident and compassionate young woman. She graduated from college with a degree in social work, inspired by her father's mission to help those in need. After graduation, she joined Rising Again as a counselor, working directly with clients to guide them through their recovery journeys. For Emma, it was a chance to give back to the community that had supported her family during their darkest times. Father and daughter worked side by side, their bond stronger than ever. They spent hours discussing cases, brainstorming ideas, and celebrating victories, big and small. On weekends, they volunteered together at local shelters, serving meals and organizing workshops. To Emma, seeing her dad lead such a purposeful life was incredibly inspiring. She admired his humility and his unwavering commitment to making a difference. One evening, as they sat on the couch in Daniel's apartment flipping through old photo albums, Emma looked up at him. "Dad, do you ever think about how far we've come?" Daniel smiled softly. "All the time. Sometimes it feels like a dream, like none of this is real." "It's real," Emma said firmly, "and you deserve every bit of it. You worked so hard to get here." Daniel shook his head. "I didn't do it alone, sweetheart. None of this would have happened without Mr. Bennett." Emma nodded. "Yeah, but he saw something in you that others missed. He gave you a chance because he believed in you." That says a lot about both of you. Daniel didn't respond right away. He stared at the photos of him and Emma, taken during their early days of rebuilding their relationship. Back then, they were still learning how to trust each other again. Now, they were inseparable. You know, he finally said, I used to think my life was over, that I'd lost everything that mattered. But now I feel like I've been given a second shot at happiness, at being a good dad, at making a difference. Emma hugged him tightly. And you're doing amazing, Dad. Don't forget that. Charles Bennett watched Daniel and Emma's progress with pride. Over the years, he had seen them grow, not just individually, but as a team. Their partnership reminded him of the importance of family and of giving people opportunities to thrive. Though Charles had always been successful in business, he realized that his greatest achievement was helping Daniel rise from despair to greatness. As he grew older, Charles began thinking more about legacy. He knew his wealth would eventually pass on to future generations, but he wanted to leave behind something more meaningful, something that would continue to inspire long after he was gone. One afternoon, he called Daniel into his office. Close the door, Charles said, motioning for Daniel to sit down. There's something I want to talk to you about. Daniel obeyed, sensing the seriousness in Charles's tone. What's on your mind, Mr. Bennett? Charles leaned forward, clasping his hands together. I've been thinking about rising again, about how much it's grown and how many lives it's changed. It's clear that this foundation is your passion, and mine too in a way. So I've decided to step aside and let you take full control. Daniel blinked in surprise. Full control? You mean? Yes, Charles interrupted with a smile. I'm handing over the reins to you. Rising again will be yours to lead completely. Of course, I'll stay involved as much as you want me to, but it's time for you to run the show. For a moment, Daniel was speechless. The idea of leading the foundation independently felt daunting but also exhilarating. Are you sure? He asked quietly. I've never been sure of anything, Charles replied. You've earned this, Daniel. Every single bit of it. Tears welled up in Daniel's eyes as he reached across the desk to shake Charles's hand. Thank you. I won't let you down. You already haven't, Charles said warmly. Now, go change the world. With Charles's blessing, Daniel took charge of Rising Again, expanding its reach even further. Under his leadership, the foundation launched new initiatives aimed at addressing systemic issues like affordable housing and access to education. They built partnerships with tech companies to provide coding classes for underprivileged youth, and collaborated with hospitals to offer free healthcare clinics in underserved communities. Daniel's vision extended beyond immediate relief. He wanted to tackle the root causes of poverty and homelessness. He traveled across the country, speaking at conferences and advocating for policy changes that would benefit marginalized populations. His speeches were heartfelt and powerful, drawing standing ovations wherever he went. At one event, a journalist asked him what drove him to do so much. Daniel paused before answering. When I was homeless, I felt invisible, like no one cared whether I lived or died. But then someone did care, someone who saw potential in me when I couldn't see it myself. That act of kindness saved my life. And now, I want to pay it forward. Because everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves a chance. The audience erupted in applause, moved by his words. For Daniel, it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about creating a ripple effect of compassion. If he could inspire just one person to believe in themselves, then all his efforts would be worth it. Meanwhile, Charles stepped back from the spotlight, allowing Daniel to shine. Though he remained involved in the foundation, he focused more on mentoring younger employees and spending time with Emma, who had become like a granddaughter to him. Together, they visited art galleries, attended concerts, and explored the city. Charles loved watching Emma grow into a strong, independent woman, just like her father. One summer evening, Charles invited Daniel and Emma to his estate for dinner. As they sat on the patio overlooking the sprawling gardens, Charles raised a glass. To family, he said, smiling at them, and to second chances. To family, Daniel and Emma echoed, clinking their glasses against his. In that moment, surrounded by the people who meant the most to him, Charles felt a profound sense of peace. He had spent decades building empires, but now he understood that true wealth came from the connections you forged and the lives you touched. Through Daniel and Emma, he had found a new kind of family, one built not on blood, but on love, trust, and shared purpose. As the sun set, casting golden light over the horizon, Charles knew he had made the right choice. By believing in Daniel, he hadn't just changed one man's life. He had sparked a chain reaction of hope and healing that would continue for generations to come. Years passed, and Daniel Harper's name became synonymous with hope and resilience. Rising Again had grown into one of the largest and most impactful organizations in the country, helping tens of thousands of people rebuild their lives. Yet despite his success, Daniel remained grounded. He never forgot where he came from or the struggles that had shaped him. Every morning as he drove to work, he reminded himself of the lessons he'd learned on the streets. Lessons about humility, perseverance, and the power of second chances. Emma, now in her late 20s, had become a driving force within Rising Again. Her role as a counselor evolved into leadership, and she worked closely with her father to expand the foundation's reach. Together they traveled across the nation, visiting shelters, schools, and community centers, spreading their message of hope. Emma's passion for social justice inspired many young volunteers to join the cause, and her ability to connect with clients earned her widespread respect. One summer, Daniel and Emma embarked on a cross-country tour to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Rising Again. They visited cities where the foundation had made a significant impact, hosting events to honor the individuals who had benefited from its programs. At each stop, they shared stories of transformation, stories of people who had gone from homelessness to stability, addiction to recovery, despair to purpose. At one event in Chicago, a woman named Maria stood up to speak. Tears streamed down her face as she recounted how Rising Again had helped her escape an abusive relationship and start a new life. "Before I met Daniel and Emma," she said, her voice trembling, "I didn't think I deserved a second chance. But they showed me that I did. They gave me the tools to believe in myself again." The audience erupted in applause, and Daniel wiped away a tear. Moments like these reminded him why he had dedicated his life to this work. It wasn't about recognition or accolades. It was about making a difference, one person at a time. Charles Bennett, now in his 80s, watched Daniel and Emma's journey with pride. Though he had stepped back from active involvement in Rising Again, he remained a close friend and advisor to both of them. His health had begun to decline, but his spirit remained strong. He often told Daniel and Emma that seeing their success was the greatest reward of his life. One crisp autumn afternoon, Charles invited Daniel and Emma to his home for lunch. As they sat together in the cozy living room sipping tea by the fireplace, Charles spoke softly. "I've been thinking a lot lately about legacy," he said, "about what we leave behind when we're gone." Daniel and Emma exchanged glances, unsure of where this conversation was headed. Charles continued, "You two have already built something extraordinary. Rising Again will continue to change lives long after I'm gone. But I want you to promise me something." "Anything," Daniel replied earnestly. "Promise me that you'll keep believing in people," Charles said. "Never stop seeing the potential in others, no matter how hidden it may seem. That's the gift I gave you, Daniel, and now it's your turn to pass it on." Emma reached over and took Charles's hand. "We promise," she said, her voice steady, "and we'll make sure everyone knows it started with you." Charles smiled, his eyes glistening. "Thank you. That means more to me than you'll ever know." A few months later, Charles passed away peacefully in his sleep. His death left a void in Daniel and Emma's lives, but it also deepened their resolve to honor his memory. They organized a memorial service at the company headquarters, inviting employees, friends, and beneficiaries of Rising Again to celebrate Charles's life. The event was filled with laughter, tears, and countless stories of how Charles had touched people's lives. During the ceremony, Daniel delivered a heartfelt speech. Charles wasn't just a mentor or a boss, he was family, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in the lives you change. And because of him, I found my purpose. Because of him, I got my daughter back. Because of him, thousands of people have been given a second chance. As Daniel spoke, Emma stood beside him holding his hand. When he finished, the room erupted in applause, a testament to the profound impact Charles had made. In the years that followed, Daniel and Emma continued to lead Rising Again with unwavering dedication. They expanded the foundation's mission to include environmental sustainability, education reform, and healthcare access. Their vision was bold, yet grounded in the belief that everyone deserved an equal opportunity to thrive. Daniel also began mentoring young leaders, passing on the wisdom he had gained over the years. He often told them, "Success isn't about climbing to the top, it's about lifting others as you go." His words resonated deeply, inspiring a new generation of changemakers. Emma, meanwhile, focused on advocacy, using her platform to push for systemic changes that addressed the root causes of poverty and inequality. She became a prominent voice in national discussions about social justice, earning praise for her compassion and determination. Together, father and daughter proved that kindness could create a ripple effect, touching lives far beyond what they could have imagined. Rising Again became not just an organization, but a movement, a beacon of hope for those who felt forgotten by the world. On the 30th anniversary of Rising Again, Daniel and Emma hosted a gala to celebrate 3 decades of impact. The event brought together beneficiaries, volunteers, donors, and supporters from across the globe. As Daniel stood on stage, looking out at the sea of faces, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "We started this journey 30 years ago with nothing but a dream," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "A dream that everyone deserves a second chance. A dream that no one should be left behind. And today, thanks to all of you, that dream has become a reality." Emma joined him on stage, holding up a plaque engraved with Charles's name. "This is for you, Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice breaking. "Because none of this would have been possible without you." The crowd erupted in applause, standing in tribute to the man who had sparked it all. For Daniel and Emma, it was a moment of reflection, a reminder of how far they had come and how much farther they still had to go. As the evening drew to a close, Daniel and Emma stood side by side, watching the guests mingle and celebrate. They knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but they also knew they weren't alone. Together they had built something bigger than themselves, a legacy of love, compassion, and resilience. And so, as the lights dimmed and the music played, softly in the background, Daniel turned to Emma with a smile. "We did good, kiddo," he said. "Real good." Emma nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "Yeah, Dad, we did." In that moment, surrounded by the people whose lives they had touched, Daniel and Emma knew they had fulfilled Charles's wish. They had kept believing in people, and in doing so, they had changed the world.